Welcome to The Brave Journey Within with Jim and Jenn. This show is about the spiritual journey and all of the challenges, healing, wisdom, and consciousness expansion experienced along the way.
Welcome back to an all new episode of Brave Journey Within with Jim and Jenn. Today's episode, we're going to delve into the topic of near death experiences, following up on our last episode of reincarnation. So, welcome, Jenn.
Yay! Yeah, we were really excited to talk about this because they kind of go hand in hand. The near death experience, the whole thing is just there's so many great stories out there. There's books and interviews, and if anyone's interested in it, there's so many things to explore with it. But both Jim and I were really interested in this conversation. So, Jim,
Yeah,
you had mentioned that there was this story that you would
my,
like to talk about. That's not quite a near death experience, but I really want to hear that.
so I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Bangladesh, and in order for me to sort of go from my village to the capital, yeah, I had to cross the Padma River, which is that's the name of it in Bangladesh at this section, but it's basically like the Ganges flowing from India, right? So you have the Himalayas and stuff like that. So the way that Bangladesh is set, it's below sea level. It's in a delta, and so every season with the rains and the floods, they have to dredge out, the crossing. So I think there might actually be a bridge now, but it's one of those places where you can't even put a bridge really because the river moves around, and
Wow.
so the current is very strong and not a place you would ever want to swim in because you would not come out. So it's a dangerous thing. And in Bangladesh, if you know anything about the ferries, they sink fairly regularly and they're often catastrophic because the ferries are overcrowded. So I think I have a blog post on it, and it just gives you an idea where there's just people everywhere. So there is no such thing as like limited capacity. It's put as many people as you can and or animals and then add some more, and it doesn't matter if the boat is not seaworthy, it's good to go.
That's
And
scary.
so on one particular journey, so this is probably I'd been there, so my service was 2 years, this is probably in the second year. And there was one day I was traveling, and how it would work is you would get, one the bus would come to one side of the river, and then you would disembark, get onto a ferry, cross the river, and then there would be another bus waiting on the other side. So we got off the bus, we got onto the boat or the ferry, and we started to cross. And there was nothing unusual about it, but as we were going across, sort of like nearing the middle of the river, all of a sudden this freak storm came out of nowhere and started rocking the boat. Now the boat is pretty shallow because they're dredging it out, so you can't have like a large keel, and it's overcrowded. So the boat started to sway. And because I had a thing with crowds over there, I would stand in the back, and the boat started to sway, and then I realized that I was like looking into the river. Like the
Oh,
boat was swaying so much to the point where I'm like, this is going to tip over. And when it tips over, it's probably going to suck in everything that's around it. And, we're all going to die. So I think at that moment, like everyone started to realize like this is a really dangerous situation. And to give you an idea of what was going on, so it's pouring rain. There's like this freak storm. The boat is swaying. It's about to tip over. The men tended to stay on the outside, and the women and the children were on the inside of the boat. And everyone is crying and wailing. And so Bangladesh is a mostly Muslim country, so everyone's crying to Allah, like save us and all this other stuff. And it's just like, okay, like this is the moment. So at the time, I think I smoked a cigarette and was just like, okay, like I need to jump off this. If I have any shot at living, I'm gonna have to jump off this boat. And so I was just waiting for the right moment to where the boat went this way, and I would jump, and I was just trying to like So this is my thought process at this moment was like, okay, where's the current going? Like, what side of the river should I try to go for? And then realistically, I'm probably just going to drown. So, like, where would the body be most easily found, type of thing?
Wow.
And so, in that moment, I was about to jump, and I remember being, I mean, it's chaos, chaos. People crying, like, this is it. You just there's a moment you realize like, okay, this is the end of the line. This is where it all ends. And I remember sort of praying to God, just saying, actually expressing gratitude, which is kind of weird at the time. Like I was not into anything like that or knew what gratitude really was, and was just at peace and just said a prayer. I hope my parents know that I'm okay. Like I'm okay with what's happening. And it was this moment of incredible peace, and I prepared to jump. And I was at the moment where I was going to jump into the river, and time seemingly stopped. And I heard a voice say, "Don't jump. Everything is going to be okay. It is not your time." And it's hard to explain when you hear a voice. I think there's a segment of Paul in the Bible where like God like smacks him down and like talks to him. That's what it was like through my bones heard this say like there was no doubt that I was hearing this. It was very clear like don't jump. It's not your time. And I didn't jump even though my mind and my fight or flight system was like, dude, you need to jump off this boat if you have any shot. Even though even though you have no shot. And I remember it's still pouring rain, and I remember seeing a guy look at me, and he like knew what I was about to do, and he was just like, "It's all right, man." And in that moment, I'm like, "This is like God being like, that was a real voice that you just heard. Don't jump. I know it doesn't look good, but you're gonna get to the other side." And sure enough, that boat limped to shore, and I jumped off that boat, and the guy, the owner of the bus company, was, "I'm so sorry." Just so apologetic to me. I'm like, "You didn't control that. Like, how could you? No one knew that was going to happen, right? Like, there's nothing to apologize for." I'm like, "I cannot believe that I'm alive." But I just had this experience where what it was for me is I got a sneak peek behind the veil where we see all these things around you. It's like, well, if God is real, prove it or this or that. It was like I can't say that anymore because somebody showed up and said, "Hello, I'm here." Like, there's a plan to all this, even though you can't necessarily see it all the time. And so I survived, and I got a window into. I didn't die, right? Like I didn't cross over and then come back, which we'll get into with some of the things that you're going to share, Jen. But that was a moment for me where I was like, okay, there is clearly something beyond us that can communicate with us, and it blew my mind because I was not in a spiritual place as I am now. But that was my fairy story, um, in my near death experience, I guess.
Yeah, to me that's truly a near death experience because when people talk about near death experiences, they talk about how they've died, like their body has died for a moment or two or maybe longer, and then it comes back to life. To me that is death and then coming back. Yours was like, in my way of seeing it, truly near death. You were
Near
like,
death.
"Oh god, oh god, oh god." And
Yeah,
God
I,
showed.
I was there. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny, my both my mom and my dad had near death experiences. My mom she was in the hospital and had very high CO2 levels and was not getting enough oxygen. And she went unconscious and died for a minute. And she said that when she had died, that a woman's voice said she had a choice. She could stay or go. And she chose to stay. And then she came back too. So hers was really short and very simple. My dad had died of a heart attack. And I don't remember how long he was gone for because this was a long time ago. But he came back and said he had these profound conversations with God. And he was told different things about each one of us. And really could not wait to give us the message when he got back. And it changed him. It really, I think, you like to think that there's such a thing as God or a higher power of some kind, but when you experience like that, you're no longer connected to the body because the body, with all intents and purposes, is not functional, but yet you're
Hmm.
still having a conscious experience outside of the body. You then realize that, like, your consciousness, your mind, your awareness is not even, it's not your brain, right? I'd love to hear on your point of view. What do you think is the difference between like our brain and our thinking and our capabilities with being a human versus our conscious mind?
Well, I guess going back to like Yogananda's work, like there's multiple levels of consciousness, like your cosmic consciousness and things like that. When you're meditating and you're observing your mind, we joke about like, well, who's doing the observing? You're looking down from sort of the soul perspective, this higher level of consciousness on yourself. And so it raises an interesting question, right? You don't have to be spiritual in any way to think like, okay, what is that? If it's not just my mind, um, I there was a book that was influential to me. I think it probably came out about the time I probably had my experience, even though I didn't read it until after when I was back stateside. But it was a book called it's Dr. Eben Alexander. I think he's a neurosurgeon. His book was called Proof of Heaven, which basically he had some kind of, I don't know if it was brain infection, but he was in a coma,
Yeah, I've heard the story. Yep.
and then he was gone. Like if I'm remembering correctly, he was dead, and he came back, and he had traveled into this world, and was able to recount in vivid detail his experiences, which in his rational mind, I think he had a I don't think he was like religious in any type of way. Maybe there was some background of it, but he was not some kind of, which is interesting, right? Like it makes you pay attention when someone has an experience and they're not religious. They're not trying to change your mind or convert you into some type of, theology. It's just like, this is what happened. And it's super fascinating because they're being more researched now, but it's because of people like Dr. Eben Alexander who wrote a book, and people were like, wait, what happened? Like you were dead. So you shouldn't be able to have this experience. And yet you're recounting things that you should not be able to do. And so those types of things were always caught my attention, where it's like, someone is observing their body from the top of the room and recounting conversations of things while they're dead, in a room where the doctors and the nurses are talking like, oh, they're dead and whatever. And it's like, wait a minute, not yet.
Yeah, yeah. I remember one of the first stories I heard outside of my dad, because that got me interested in the topic when my dad told me what happened. There was somebody who had died in the hospital and floated up above the hospital and saw a shoe on the roof. And they mentioned it to whoever was in the room when they woke up. And sure enough, there was a shoe on the roof. And yeah, that's so fascinating. It's true. We are a consciousness. We are an energy. We're a spirit. We're a soul inside of this human avatar temporarily, right? And I guess sometimes people just check out for a little bit and come back. What I find
Yeah.
really interesting is a lot of them have talked about how it changed them, and they come back sometimes with new abilities, healing abilities, or a different type of connection, spiritually speaking, or their gifts are enhanced. There are people who suddenly can channel and things like that. And
Or play like concert piano.
yes, isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Not that I want that to happen to me necessarily, but sometimes I'm like, all right, if you can download something like that with like that quick, maybe we can do it in meditation too. Maybe we can go in and hook us up to that ability. And
Yeah, well, I guess it's for people that aren't as familiar with the topic, there's certain features that happen, right? Like, so in my experience, in the moment where I thought I was going to die, I was in a state of utter, peace and tranquility. I was completely okay, and like surprised myself, like that you could be in a state in that.
yeah.
Um, and I suppose there's the belief, if you kind of studied some other things, where your soul jumps before the stuff happens to you. So like my soul might have jumped before I hit the water, type of thing. You know.
It's funny. The first time I ever heard that, the idea that your soul will leave your body for a little bit, I knew somebody I used to work with back before I got into all the spiritual side of things. And she said that when she was in labor, there was so much pain that she literally left her body
Hmm.
and was watching things from above as it was happening. And I just thought that was so crazy. And now you hear things like that all the time. Like, oh, yeah, I was just floating in the room
Yeah,
during a meditation. And
it's
yeah,
also interesting. I mean, like you said, your mom had the choice, right? So that's another thing. Sometimes people are given a choice. Like, do you want to go back? And sometimes they're like, no, it's nice here. I don't want to go back.
I know,
Kind
right?
of rough. It's kind of rough down there. I don't. I would prefer not to.
Yeah. I can understand that. And I've heard some of the stories too where they're just like, they aren't even given a choice. They're like, no, sorry, time to go. You got your glimpse. You don't belong here right now. Go back. And then they start coming back into their body. And a lot of times, they've left their body because of an injury or like a heart attack or something. And when they come back, they talk about how heavy it is and how painful it is, and like the merging back in and having to deal with the 3D experience.
Like the
Um,
density from being like a light being or your soul to in a physical body.
yeah. And then also, too, if there's an injury involved, just the pain of that and being so free for whatever time it is you're outside of the body and then having to come back in, it's almost like it's even more painful than if you had never left because it's just such a stark contrast with what is on the other side of that veil,
Hmm.
with whatever that is. But then that also gets me thinking too, like, is this a simulation? Are we in some sort of like a, is this really reality, or is that really reality, or are they both reality? What are your thoughts on that? I love that conversation too as a part of all of this.
I mean, the film that got me kind of thinking about that was The Matrix, which is okay. What is real? Is this all by design?
Right.
And I think in some ways, like there's something to that, right? Like we're in this play, we're the soul, which is desiring an experience, and this is one reality that we get to do it in. It's a very dense reality. It's very challenging. It's not for the faint of heart. And if you're here right now, or even if you're listening to this, like there's some reason why that you, which is have been attracted to even listen to us even talk about this topic.
Right.
There's
Yeah.
certain books and people, synchronicities that pop into your life that it's like, okay, I'm for some reason right now I'm meant to be hearing this, and it's going to land with you a certain way. I think for me with the near death experiences was there was a sense of peace about the whole thing where it's like, okay, I don't really have anything to worry about. Like I'm experiencing this experience,
That's just
and
crazy. Yeah.
whatever it is, like my soul is desiring to experience this, and there's no judgment involved in it. There's no like right or wrong. It's just okay, like what is that like? What's it like to have this scenario happen, or going through a divorce, like that was pretty painful. Like why did you want to do that? Well, I who knows, but like I have that experience now. I know what that's like. um, that polarity, I guess, right? Like you can't how do you experience joy if you don't know what suffering is?
Yeah, but what's interesting with that as you're talking, you mentioned how calm you were in those really rough seas. Not many people would be that calm, right? I mean, most people I know panic and freak out in times of distress, whether it's
Mhm.
something like that where it feels life and death, or if it's just a fear of something, maybe even financial or something like that, people will freak out. And I think a lot of times, I think the universe gives us what we need to help us conquer our fears. And as we make it through something, I think for the average person, as we make it through something, we then feel a little bit more confident about our abilities to handle things, right? Or maybe confidence in the universe, or that things will be okay, things will work out one way or another. And, I think one of the things that the near death experiences show us is that there's nothing to be afraid of around death or of other
Yeah.
people dying, right? I mean, I think a lot of times we get in fear around losing somebody in our life because that means that we'll have to live without them, in the 3D experience anyway, when they never really leave us. They're just
I
out of
Well,
body.
that's really important to understand, is that the people that you love and that are around you are never, assuming you want to be around them, when they cross over. And you'll hear that with medium, like these are people, right? So like I don't know, talk about ghosts or haunting, like you're talking to a person who's in spirit form. So you address them in a certain way, like you would a human being. um
Absolutely. Yeah.
they're never really gone. That should provide some sense of comfort. I think when you truly kind of understand that, death takes on this whole new thing, right? Where it's like, okay, this isn't some finality that I'm never going to see such and such person again. I think we were talking about with my past life regression, like that space in the in between. So where people in their consciousness are able to go in between lives and see what that is like. Um, which sounds like maybe your dad was given sort of an insight into sort of like life reviews or life planning, the agreements that your soul makes with other souls to share in this experience, whether they're the protagonist or the antagonist, or
Yeah.
what character you want to play in this new drama as it unfolds. Which, I mean, is also super fascinating. That why would I choose this?
Right. Well, that's always an interesting question too. And it's hard to talk about past life or multiple lives and near death experiences without talking about how people pass. And sometimes it might be as simple as they live until a beautiful old age and then they pass in their sleep, or maybe they pass when they're really young. Some people pass really easily, and some people suffer during the passing. And I think what's so hard is, if you see someone who's maybe elderly and they pass in their sleep, you might miss them and feel sad that they're gone, but it's not so traumatic, or it doesn't feel like such a, I don't want to say it's not a terrible thing, because I know, that's touchy for a lot of people and how they process death, but it doesn't feel as sad as maybe someone who died young or someone who died violently or in some sort of like a really traumatic accident of some kind.
Hmm.
But I think the beauty in all of it is how we process it. Because, like you said, we hear over and over again how people, before they had an accident in their near death experience, they leave their body so that they don't have to experience that pain. And Not that all souls would do that. I would imagine some stick around to feel it for some reason or another, I would guess. But what's interesting to me is the lessons that it shows us, when someone goes through that experience themselves, or when we experience and we're still here and we experience someone's passing, how it affects us and what we're meant to get from the death experience from our perspective and our eyes. And as like, for example, when I see my dad or my mom and what they experienced, I'm in awe, but they came back. If they would have passed from a traumatic event, or if someone young passes, it's definitely harder to process. And I'm just curious, especially with the past life regressions and you've experienced traumatic deaths and things like that come up for people. How would you, I guess, categorize is probably the wrong word. How would you talk about it to someone who's maybe a patient or a client of yours and they're re experiencing, maybe in a past life regression, a very difficult or traumatic death or the passing of a loved one that was really hard and maybe they're still healing from in this lifetime?
Uh, one of the more recent ones that I did, it was a woman who, in the past life, was a young father, and was we went to the death scene, and basically they had uh, righted their life, like they were younger and kind of living the life of a younger person, but then had started to get their stuff together and were supporting their family, and kind of the family was reunited, and they were walking down the street and got hit by I think it was a truck, and we determined it was maybe like about 26 years old.
Wow.
And so there was, when we explored that, like this unfinished business of being a caretaker and providing for their family, like that was something that was very important to them in this life. But that's kind of what they were left with. So you could see how there was this transition from kind of like, okay, I didn't get to fully heal that back then, and now I have the opportunity with some of the cast of characters to, from that time here now, to be that person and to do it in an exemplary way, which, knowing this person made a lot of sense, like very motherly, very caretaking, and just it's just very fascinating to see how these lives intertwine, and how you uncover all these different things, about the different characteristics of that life, and how you would want to plan and like, okay, like I would like to experience this now.
Yeah. Something else I've heard along the way that I find really interesting, and when I connect about it, my guides agree with it. Um, how we die is important because when we suffer, we, let's say someone's passing of an illness or something and they're suffering through their death in a way, or it's a drawn out process in some way. Um, there's a burning through karma that tends to happen with that. So in some cases, that is, it's an appropriate way for that soul to pass. And what happens is when we see suffering in someone else, it's painful. Right? We don't want to see other people suffering because we don't want to suffer. So there's a fear of suffering. But what I found really interesting about that point of view, with the idea that when someone is suffering, there's purpose to it. It's that they're actually in some way shifting things and balancing energies within their own experience. And that maybe that's exactly what they need. And while that's a hard concept for us to, really grasp and be appreciative of in the 3D experience, I think from a higher level, it can be really seen as, even that could be seen as a beautiful transition in a way. And, but that's hard. It's a hard thing to talk about. It's a hard thing to grasp. And there's a certain level of awareness and understanding that a person needs to be in to really be able to hold that for the person who's suffering and within themselves. And because I don't
Yeah.
know, personally, I really hope I just pass in the night and it's nice, easy passing. I don't want to have to suffer through it. But, I guess it's going to be whatever it needs to be.
Well, in a sense, we have free will, and you as a soul might choose that, which won't make sense to anyone else really, other than that's what you are wanting to happen for us for a reason. One of my mentors wrote her dissertation on near-death experiences, and one of them that stood out to me was a woman who claimed to have a conversation with God, and in that conversation, she was like, what? Essentially questioning him, like, and I'm using him, but choose your own word. Why would you, create this? There's good, but there's all this bad. And essentially his answer is, there's a reason for everything. And you don't understand. It's not for you to understand, but there's a reason for everything, even that. And that stood out to me, like, okay, I'm not going to necessarily understand the reason for that suffering or things that you see that you want to change. Um, but it is divinely orchestrated for some higher purpose that I'm not privy to. And,
Right.
not that I need to sit back and let it happen, but like that, just seeing it from a neutral lens, like, okay, these things exist for a reason. I may not know it, but can I be okay with that?
Yeah. Well, I think as somebody who watches somebody else pass, so those of us who are still here, right, we have to
Mhm.
deal with the not
Like the
knowing.
moment of passing?
Well, even just afterwards, the processing, the missing the person who's passed. We're still stuck here in this density, and they, in a sense, have been set free. But we have to process it through this density, and it makes it really hard. And personally, as a spiritual teacher and a healer, the goal is to not function so much in the density. It's to raise your vibration and be functioning above that density in a way. And it's hard because, if you're trying to process someone's passing, and I know, so I've seen a lot of death recently too in the last couple of years. There's been a lot more of it, it seems.
Yes.
And I see more and more people having to process it. And I've been through it. I've watched people pass and pets pass, and it's never an easy experience because there's a grief process you go through. But you can definitely go through that grief process from a higher vibrational state and a larger awareness of the overall picture, and not see it as tragic. And work on yourself within, trying to heal and clear the things that you get stuck on, because really we're upset usually because we don't have them in our lives anymore and we miss them. But the soul, my experience in working with souls who've crossed over and as they come back in healing sessions to work with the people still in 3D, what they often, I mean, they're great. They're happy. They're healed. They're, a much better version of themselves and
I
happy to
think it's
help out.
important for people to know, like, they're fine.
Yeah, most of the time. Now there are some people
Most
that
of
haven't
the
crossed over, and there's things like that happen. They get a little bit stuck, but for the most part, once they cross over, they're amazing. Like they come back, they're healed, they're fun, they feel so much love. They feel, like they want to apologize for things maybe they've done wrong, or to heal that connection in some way for the person who's still here in this space. And I think if there's anything I would want to get across to people, it's, we this is not all there is in this 3D reality. This is just a small blip of our existence. And there's so much more to understand about it all. And to not, if you can help it, to feel so sad by the loss. Celebrate the fact that they're now moving on into their next phase of experience, and realize that they're not gone forever. They're still here. You can still call on them and they can come. And if we can see it more through that beautiful lens of the positive nature of it, and not get lost in, um, I'm going to say, the 3D egoic need to have them here with
yeah.
us. I think it's a much easier healing process, and it doesn't hold you up. We're not meant to be stuck in that space of trauma with it. Um,
Yeah, it's so my first experience with that, I was so just I was at a pretty big low point in my life. I'm not even sure. It was like post separation, so I was like away from my kids and stuff like that, living in a new place, and I was driving, and on my car was hooked up to my phone, and a recording came on that was it shouldn't have come on, but it popped on in my like music playlist, and it was something that someone had sent me that was very sentimental. And I got home and I was just like, this is super weird. Um, and basically, the recording was something that my cousin had sent me. She had gone to a medium and had this session recorded, and this is what popped on. But what's interesting about it is that in the reading, it talks about someone named Jim. And so she's like, well, I have a cousin. And the message in the reading was he doesn't know it yet, but his life is going to change and everything's going to be okay. So this freaked me out. And I got home, and I was at the time was living with my parents, and I shared, I just had this really odd experience. And the next day, I'm in my car and I'm thinking, I think in my head, if that was you talking to my grandmother, who's been deceased for, I don't know, at the time, maybe at least 5 years, if that was you, give me a sign. And the moment I had the thought, my alarm on my phone went off in my car as I was driving, and like a bolt of electricity shot through me. And I was like, oh my God, okay, I'm good. I'm good. I got the message. Like
right? I
it,
know.
it was one of those things where it's like, clearly something was paying attention to my thoughts. I wasn't just, and so it was like, okay, you can communicate with the other side. That's wild. And for me, that was, we all have our own levels of validation. Some people listening to this might be like, it sounds great, but whatever. You have your own threshold for that, but there's when you have your own experience and it catches you off guard, and you're just like, okay, I get it. I don't need any more confirmation. I got what I needed, and I got what I needed there. So, like, to your point, yeah, you can communicate. They're around. They're there to help you, typically, and support you. There's a lot of love on the other side.
Hmm.
I also do want to mention too, in my experience, when I shared that they said it wasn't my time, it later what I found out, that was an exit point. So if anyone's not familiar with exit points, there are moments in your life that you could depart,
Hmm.
and maybe you do, maybe you don't. And like they say, a cat has 9 lives. It's something like that. There are moments when you can choose to go or not. There's a lot that goes into that, but at that point, that was not my time to go. So
Wow. I mean, that's just so fascinating.
life is fascinating, isn't it?
It is. I know. Well, spiritual connection is fascinating. All of this is in the greater picture of what's going on in our purpose here and what we're meant to do with this experience. I think sometimes people take it so um, myopically and so deep, and they just focus on this thing and their 3D experience without realizing the bigger picture. And we lose focus of what's really going on, and then it causes suffering.
I would say a lot of the near death experiences that I have studied, people come back and they are more mindful. They take time to have a conversation or to spend time with people. They don't take themselves so seriously, or their job so seriously. Not that those things aren't important, but there's a certain joy to living that kind of comes back with that, where it's like, maybe a balancing of priorities.
Yeah, it puts it into a maybe a more truthful perspective, um, more of an idea of what this is really all about, as opposed to what we think it might be about or what we're trained that it should be about. And but doing that, we go within and we open up and we find so much more in this experience. And I think a lot of times we go through things just in fear and wanting to get the heck out of whatever it is we're going through. We forget to balance that with the purpose and what we're going through from a place of joy and love, because that's really where it's meant to come from. And I don't know, it just feels like if there's any lesson we can learn from NDEs or understanding past life regression and the purpose of all of this, it's that, you realize there's so much more than this one moment, but at the same time there's nothing more than this one moment, right? It's like a paradox. And it's when you're in that space of knowing that, like, you're everything and you're nothing all at once, right? I mean, you're just like, oh, that's what it is. And life shifts and your ideas of it shift and your awakening can occur. And I don't know about you, but the spiritual path is awakening after awakening after awakening, deeper and deeper and deeper into myself as my own experience.
Yeah, there's truth in that, right? Like the I don't know, it was Eckhart Tolle has the quote, like the universe is in the moment. Like which when I first heard that, I'm like, that sounds really
Yeah.
interesting. Like I don't get that at all. Like
What does he mean
the
by that?
universe
All
is in
right.
the moment. And then I'm like, wait a minute, okay. And then you have like, Hollywood coming out with The Matrix or, these movies like Everything Everywhere All at Once. And I'm like, oh,
Oh, yes, there's three
it
more.
makes sense.
Well, but I think if, as someone watching this or listening to this, if there's anything they can walk away from, it's understanding that there's so much more to what you're going through and to not get stuck in the details, like get bigger picture, get more internal and understand why you're going through what you're going through, because there's purpose in that. And step out of the tragedy of things, or as you see it as a tragedy or a loss, and start working from the beautiful side of whatever's going on as much as you can, even in death.
Yeah, I mean, I've been fortunate enough to work with a number of hospice workers.
Hmm.
They have the most amazing stories that
Yes.
happen at the end of life. You know, to give you an example, they'll physically see family members that aren't there but are there, really essentially welcoming home the person that's in the hospital bed. And it's like this death is just not this scary thing, but it can be this beautiful moment, this beautiful transition, if you can see it in that way. Good life, good death. How do I want to die well? And just knowing that it can be this beautiful thing and not this scary, awful, traumatic, grief-stricken thing. There's a completely different way to look at it if you're open to it. If you're curious about it, there's a lot of good books on near death experiences. I think Raymond Moody has one. There's just a lot of resources. It's a big topic on podcasts now. You'll have a lot of people interviewing people that have had near death experiences. They're all super fascinating. Um, I find them very interesting. Just different people at different points in their life that have these things. Maybe they overdose on drugs and they come back and their life completely changes because their perspective has changed based on what happened to them. So look more if you're curious or you like what you heard. Dive into it, see what you find. You may find that it helps you in some way appreciate this life that you're living now.
And appreciate the fact that people have gone home. Maybe they're not in this experience anymore, but they're still around and they're doing amazing things on the other side.
There is a Ram Dass quote that I used to have in my office, and the woman that moved into my office still has it there. But the quote is, "We are all just walking each other home."
Oh, I love it.
And so maybe that's a good thing to close on, is to kind of marinate on that. And that's if you can live your life that way and just kind of appreciate that, then doing something good.
It's beautiful. Thank you, Jim.
All right.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. See you next time.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
We are so grateful that you joined us. Check out the description to learn more about us and also for additional resources to help you on your journey.